Alright, so right now we're going to do a short video on lip and labret piercings and just some basic info and aftercare. For those of you who don't know, lip piercings are piercings on the side of the lip, and a labret piercing is a piercing right in the middle of the lip, okay? Let's start with a lip piercing first. With the lip piercing, usually you're going to start off with two different types of jewelry. You can either do a captive bead ring, or you can do a Labret Post, or some people like to refer to it as a flat back. Now, your captive bead ring, in general, is going to be two sizes, or it's going to come in two size options. You have a 16 gauge, or you have a 14 gauge, okay? And that's just referring to the thickness of the ring. 16 gauge being thinner, 14 gauge being a little bit thicker. Now, you also have diameters, okay? Now, diameters are going to be either a 3/8 or a 7/16. And that is something that your piercer is just going to have to figure out for you, okay? And he'll help figure out what size your lip needs. In general, I like to pierce a lot of guys with a 7/16 diameter, and I pierce most girls with a 3/8 diameter. And now there's always exceptions to that rule, but in general, that's how I measure those. Now, you also have the Labret Post, or the flat back. For those guys, usually they're going to be 16 gauge or 14 gauge as far as the thickness goes. 16 gauge seems to be a really common and popular size right now. But you also have 18 gauge for those guys too. Now, 18 gauge, a lot of companies have been making some really neat, really cool 18 gauge Labret Post or flat back posts. And they're kind of picking up steam and becoming more and more popular. Those are great, but as usually you're going to come across a 16 gauge or a 14 gauge from them. You're going to have a couple different lengths. Now, your lengths are going to be 3/8 or 7/16. I usually pierce females with a 3/8 length, and I usually pierce guys with a 7/16 length, okay? And that is going to give both of them just enough length to stick out to compensate for like swelling and healing and stuff of that nature. Your swelling and healing, you know, you're probably looking at around a week to 2 weeks of swelling. So just know your lip's going to puff up, and you're going to be glad you have a little bit longer post in there, which is what a 3/8 or a 7/16 is going to be, just a little bit longer post. So when you get pierced right off the bat, it's going to stick out a little bit like an antenna in the beginning, and then your lip's going to slowly start to puff up over that next week or so, okay? It's going to fill up that space. You'll be glad you had that extra length in there. You leave that longer post in there for the first month, and you're probably looking around 3 to 4 weeks. And then once that thing starts sticking out, which no sooner than 3 or 4 weeks, once it starts sticking out like an antenna again, because that swelling's gone away, you can go back into a shop or just get some jewelry that's a little bit shorter. Usually 5/16 is the pretty standard downsize for a lip piercing. And then that same thing applies to the captive bead rings. Now, the captive bead rings, they're going to be a little bit looser hoop, you know, in the beginning to allow room for that swelling and healing those first few weeks. And then, you know, 3-4 weeks, right around that month time frame, you can get a tighter fitted one in there if you wanted to also. You could also switch to a different type of ring. You can switch to one without a bead in there. Just know that you never start with a ring without a bead. You can only switch to it later on. The ones without a bead, they have little seams in them, and they're not the best for healing. Once you're healed, you can switch to one without a bead, no problem. The captive bead rings is really good because they kind of prevent the seam or anything from going inside your lip while it's healing. Now, with the labret, same kind of general thing. The only difference is you usually don't pierce a labret with a ring. Now, you can, but usually you don't. And if you do pierce with a ring in a labret, it's gonna be a really big, giant ring. It looks kind of goofy. So usually for a labret, you would start with a stud. Once again, usually being 16 gauge or 14 gauge. And the same thing as far as the length goes, 3/8 or 7/16. Once it's healed, which would be around 2 months. If you wanted to put a ring in there at that point, you can. That's totally fine, no problem. But also, in around 3 to 4 weeks, you can downsize that to a shorter 5/16 post if you wanted to also. And then, there, like I said before, with the 18 gauge, as far as the lip goes, you know, that is always an option too. If you're like a smaller girl, really petite face, and you want a really tiny piece of jewelry, 18 gauge is awesome. And like I said, I don't usually pierce with them, but I know they're kind of becoming more and more popular, and I don't really see anything too wrong with them right now. Now, as far as aftercare goes, I'm gonna kind of reiterate what I said earlier. You're looking at 2 to 3 months of basic healing for those piercings, and then about a week to 2 weeks of swelling for those piercings, okay? 3 to 4 weeks, roughly around a month, is when you can downsize your jewelry or swap your jewelry out. But for the most part, don't go just changing it or messing with it too much until it's totally healed, which is right around that 2 to 3 month mark. And that's also the same time frame you want to be doing your aftercare, 2 to 3 months. Just like any other piercing, no touching it, no playing with it, no rotating or spinning the jewelry. Just know you have a scab in there, and when you spin around and move it, it's just like picking out a scab. The more movement it's going to get, whether it's with your tongue, your hands, or whatever, the more scar tissue you're going to build up. And you really tend to see the scar tissue building up on these guys on the outside of the piercing a lot. So be really conscious with it and leave it alone and just let it heal. Now, Never ever put hydrogen peroxide or alcohol or Neosporin or Bactine or any of that stuff on there. That stuff is all way too harsh, just way too harsh, and just does a lot more damage than good. Saltwater soaks and saltwater soaks only. Now, for your saltwater soaks, really simple. Go to the grocery store, get a gallon of distilled water. You know, once again, it's in the drinking water section. Pretty cheap and easy, okay? Then go to the salt section and get either like a non-iodized or an all-natural sea salt. Also pretty cheap and easy, all right? When you get both those items home, it's gonna be 4 teaspoons of the salt to the 1 gallon of water, all right? Shake it up. That's gonna give you a big jug to keep around the house. Now, once or even twice a day, take a shot glass or coffee cup. Always glass or porcelain or something of that nature. Never paper or plastic. Paper or plastic can contaminate your solution, so don't use those. Only glass or porcelain. So coffee cup, shot glasses work really well. Fill one of those up with the saltwater solution. Microwave for a few seconds, just barely body temperature, okay? So it's lukewarm or body temp. Lean forward, push it up against your chin, and almost like you're taking a drink of water, but taking it from your chin, okay? And you're just gonna tilt it back and submerge your lip in there, or your labret, okay? Whichever one you got pierced. But submerge it in there and let it soak for about 7 to 15 minutes. Pretty simple, there's no reason not to do it. Once you're done with the soak, rinse it off with some water really well. Just kind of hold your head in the sink, rinse it off, you know, just get that excess salt water off of there. And then it's not a bad idea to rinse out with that saltwater solution also. Take another cup, fresh saltwater solution, fill it up, and just rinse out for 30 seconds, spit it out. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you can get a little water bottle you can kind of carry around with you, fill it up with a saltwater solution, and when you're out and about, say like anytime you go out to lunch or dinner or anything of that nature, basically anything goes in your mouth, just rinse out for 30 seconds. Yeah, that's pretty much so it. I guess one last thing, just like any other piercing also, avoid public bodies of water, oceans, pools, lakes, jacuzzis, stuff like that. Lots of kissing, try and avoid, and also any oral contact. So hopefully that's kind of answers any questions you might have about labret and lip piercings. And yeah, that's it guys, thanks.